Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The opening keynote will begin in about 5 minutes. Please move to your seats and help us begin on schedule. At this time, please silence your electronic devices. If you have a question for our speakers, you may send it in via text or email to the address on the screen. askmetncyber@gmail.com. That's askmetncyber@gmail.com. We thank you for adhering to the TechNet Cyber Health and Safety Plan. Please refer to the event website for the full list of requirements and recommendations. If you find that you are exhibiting COVID symptoms, we ask that you please advise a staff member immediately. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of AFCEA International, welcome to Day 3 of TechNet Cyber. Before we begin this morning's program, may I please have your attention for a few brief administrative remarks. We thank you for adhering to the TechNet Cyber Health and Safety Plan. Please refer to the event website for the full list of requirements and recommendations. If you find that you are exhibiting COVID symptoms, we ask that you please advise a staff member immediately. Questions for our speakers in this keynote space will be taken electronically. You can email or text your questions to askmetncyber@gmail.com. Signal Magazine will be blogging throughout the week, and their reports will be available on the Signal website. If you don't have Signal bookmarked, just go to www.afcea.org and you'll find a link. Additionally, recordings and presentations from the week's sessions that are authorized for release will be available after the event on the AFCEA website and YouTube channel. AFCEA is honored to recognize 2 sterling professionals this morning for their distinguished work in cyber. But first, a little history. The Ancient Order of St. Isidore Award was founded in 2013 during the first year of establishment of Army Cyber Command to recognize superior cyber performance. Through agreement with the first Commanding General of Army Cyber Command, now retired Lieutenant General Rhett Hernandez, and AFCEA, an award was conceived to recognize performance within the Army cyber workforce. Isidore was the patron saint of the encyclopedia books that he wrote on grammar, astronomy, geography, history, biography, and more. He lived between 560 and 636 AD, serving as Archbishop of Seville for more than 32 years, and is considered as the last scholar of the ancient world. In 1997, Pope John Paul II decided that the Internet should have a patron saint to guide Catholics in its proper use. As a natural fit, the patron of the encyclopedia was also designated the father of the Internet. The Army adopted St. Isidore as the patron saint of cyber and established 3 levels of awards to the cyber workforce as follows: Gold level, contributions to service and country; Silver level, contributions to command and service; and Bronze level, contributions to unit and command. The maximum number of awards authorized each year is 5 gold, 10 silver, and 20 bronze awards. In 2019, AFCEA recognized that the award is greater than a single service and is in the process of transitioning St. Isidore into a joint award for recognition by active duty and civilian employees of the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and the National Guard. We are here today to recognize 2 of the 5 gold awardees, who were selected by a board of 10 members with representation from each service, educators, and members of the AFCEA Cyber Committee. I would now like to invite award winners to the stage, along with the President and CEO of AFCEA, Lieutenant General Susan Lawrence, and Major General Kevin Kennedy, United States Cyber Command's Director of Operations. Our first recipient is Command Sergeant Major Marlene N. Harshman, 780th Military Intelligence Brigade, was the first Command Sergeant Major for the 915th Cyber Warfare Battalion, 780th MI Brigade, where she spearheaded the battalion's cyber training pipeline development, funding, and execution for the 17 series occupations, which were used to develop thousands of personnel. During her tenure, CSM Harshman made unparalleled contributions to the DoD cyberspace community, and her unmatched efforts enabled the deployment of the first expeditionary cyber team to support recent operations in Europe. Our second recipient is Command Sergeant Major Kermit D. Harless, Senior Enlisted Advisor to Task Force 127, Task Force Echo 6, and Command Sergeant Major of the 127th Cyber Protection Battalion, Indiana Army National Guard. He deployed with the Task Force Echo as the Operations Sergeant Major, where he directly influenced the relationship between the National Guard and active duty Army and participated in strategic level discussions with the major cyber elements of U.S. Army Cyber Command, U.S. Army Corps of Cadets, and sister services of Navy, Marines, and Air Force. He was also instrumental in state partnership program events with Indiana's partner country, Slovakia, sharing experiences and programs with Slovakia's Ministry of Defense and training their communications brigade on communications, encryption, and cyber capabilities. Command Sergeant Major Harless is accompanied today by his spouse, Deborah. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Lieutenant General Lawrence.
Thank you, team. Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a great night last night. I heard Baltimore was really a buzz, and it's great to see as many of you here today as we do, so thank you so much. So, day 3 of an amazing conference, and I want to thank our partners at DISA for a fabulous agenda, great speakers, and support that we had this year. All our speakers were phenomenal this week. And to the attendees, and especially to the AFCEA members, and wouldn't it be cool if you remembered the booth number of AFCEA to sign up if you're not a member? Yes. So thank you so much. So if you weren't here for some of the speakers, if you would go to the Signal magazine during their show daily, you'll get a recap of everything that happened here this week. You can also go to afcea.org/signal to view that coverage. And you can also go, I don't know if you all know, that we actually have an AFCEA chapter channel on YouTube. And if you go to that, you actually can see all the excitement from yesterday when we did the fire drill. So, is that right, Howard? As we move into the third and final day, I'd like to once again thank who I really believe are the rock stars, and that's industry that's here with us this week. We can't thank you enough. This is the largest floor we've had for this event. So thank you for your support. We can't exist without you, and we really appreciate you, so thank you. We start this morning's program with a keynote presentation, and great presenter who I was able to meet when we were working the early ITAS work with the Air Force CIO office. Major General Kevin B. Kennedy, Director of Operations at USCYBERCOM, National Security Agency. General Kennedy received his commission from the U.S. Air Force Academy in 1990. He is a command pilot with more than 3,400 flying hours in the B-1 and the T-38, including combat over Afghanistan. As the Cybercom's Director of Operation, he plans, coordinates, integrates, and conducts mission command of full-spectrum Department of Defense information networks. And he works with also, besides the defense of those networks, the offensive, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operations in order to enable actions in all domains and ensure the United States and allies are freedom from action through the cyberspace, and of course, to deny the same to our adversaries. Please join me in welcoming General Kennedy to the stage.
All right, thank you, General Lawrence. Appreciate that, ma'am. And thank you for everyone and for AFCEA for letting me join you today to provide a few remarks on behalf of USCYBERCOM. I do feel I have to follow up the bio because everyone left and they said, well, there's a B-1 pilot going to talk about cyber. What are we doing? When I made General Officer in 2015, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force put me in my first cyber job, and I've been doing that ever since. So still learning every day, but I've had a variety of positions across that include some time in the CIO to really understand, the complexity of the domain that you operate, build, and then, make sure we are securing our nation's interest. And so today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about USCYBERCOM and how we're approaching 2022, how General Nakasone has us structured, and again, how we're our closest partner in that activity is the National Security Agency, though I'm not actually a member of the National Security Agency or the IC, but there is, I find, very few activities that we aren't closely partnered, as intelligence drives operations, and in the cyber domain, SIGINT drives most of our activities. So it's an incredibly crucial relationship and partnership as we're talking about this today is one of the themes. I was also struck by the two soldiers on the stage today. You know, it's not often an Air Force general officer gets to recognize two soldiers in their activities, so congratulations, well done. And one of the things there, as we get through my remarks, you're going to hear a theme of partnerships. And one of the programs mentioned was a state partnership program, and that is one of the areas that US Cyber Command is looking to how we expand that activity as our allies and partners look to increase their resilience in the cyber domain, as well as their ability to thwart adversaries that are trying to penetrate their networks. So I have about 15 minutes of remarks here or so, and then I'm happy to take any questions that we can. In my position, I'm always, if I'm pausing, it's not that I'm trying to be really, cute with my answer, it's that I'm trying to make sure I don't bust classification. So that's how it will go up here today as we're moving forward. So first of all, most of you are, when we think about trust, velocity, and agility, the three kind of the themes of this conference this week. When US Cyber Command, I think we would say that's exactly how General Nakasone directs us to think about it in that themes, and kind of breaking those down into the talent, the technology, and the trusted partnerships that we need to accomplish our mission. So our mission here is to execute global cyber operations in the defense of the nation. US Cyber Command has three core missions underneath that. The first one is to secure, operate, and defend the Department of Defense's information networks, weapon systems, platforms, and ensure the mission of the Department of Defense to make sure that we can defend the nation. The next one is we defend the nation against cyber attack. And this is the case, is we make sure that we are out beyond the borders of the nation, as well as securing our defenses home. Within the Department of Defense, we're also looking and contesting the adversaries as they're moving forward and trying to gain advantage during competition that they would look to leverage during crisis and conflict. And finally, we support the Joint Force as we think about how we enact and enable integrated deterrence across all domains and all theaters that we support. US Cyber Command directly supports every combatant command in the department. We have headquarters that are aligned to every combatant command in the department, and we also have two other primary roles that we accomplish for the department. One is Joint Force Trainer, which means we set the standards and the mission essential tasks for anyone involved with the operations in the cyber domain, so cyber operations forces, not just the cyber mission force. And the next one is that we are the Joint Force Provider. So when you think about how we are putting forces out, we work closely with the Joint Staff in a global force management role to decide how those forces are going to be leveraged across the department. So our priorities for 2022. Our first priority in 2022 is readiness. It's foundational to operations. You cannot execute military operations without some base level of readiness, and that's what we are intensely focused on right now. Readiness, I think of readiness in three core pillars. There's the doctrine, there's the people, and there's the capabilities you employ. If you're missing in any of those three, you're not able to create effects, you're not able to create an operation to execute. And so we are focusing on that across the cyber mission force, as well as the cyber operations force. And one of the key elements of readiness that we're looking for to enhancing this year is our cybersecurity service providers and how we operationalize them to make sure that when General Skinner, who is the sponsor this week as the district director, gives an order in his JFHQ DODIN hat, when he gives that order, we understand how forces will execute that order. You can't have a repeatable military operation without understanding that, and that's what we're looking at with that. The next one is the number two priority is operations in the defense of the nation. Fairly busy lately in this area as we're going forward as we think through the crisis in Europe. Also, election security in 2022 is going to be similar, we think, to the operations where we ensured no interference in the election in 2020. Finally, we've also had a pivot in the last year, and we think more will happen this year as we think about ransomware. I think about a year and a half ago, if you had asked me what the responsibility of the Department of Defense and ransomware was, it was purely in support of DOJ in that activity. It's primarily an LE activity. What we're finding, though, in recent times is that ransomware is a national security imperative as well. And so that we work, again, partners with DOJ and FBI and the lead, and others. But this is something that U.S. Cyber Command has taken a keen interest in, and we've organized to ensure that we have capabilities within the command able to support the interagency effort that's looking to counter the ransomware threat, both to our ability to produce combat power as well as the impacts it could have on our nation's economy. The next one we look at is defending the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, and how that supports Department of Defense operations. And so we work proactively, primarily through our Cyber National Mission Force and partnership with the NSA, CISA, and DOJ to make sure that we have that relationship well aligned. We also partner really closely with our counterintelligence organizations within the department to make sure we can partner forces and understand what's happening on the networks that support our force. The other key as we're partnering across the DIB is we've made great strides lately in voluntary information sharing within the department, within the Defense Industrial Base, which I think is absolutely vital as we're looking to defend the nation. You cannot defend what you can't see. And finally, support the defense of SICR. This is one of the lessons as we looked at the Ukraine crisis and we've seen the reporting, open source reporting, and understanding, having frank conversations about where our SICR is and the level of defenses that we have on it and the potential vulnerabilities that exist. And so this is another area that we will be keenly focused on as we move forward into 22 or continue. Next is integrated deterrence. That's our number 3 and how we support that. Essentially, cyberspace supports and enables all instruments of national power, and it's also a vector the adversary can exploit to decrease and impact our instruments of national power. So the capabilities that we have and the operations that we put out and lead on behalf of the department is absolutely vital. And the fundamental principle driving our support to integrated deterrence is that preparing for crisis and conflict while campaigning in competition is how US Cybercom is going to support that. And its fundamental underlying is partnerships. And so partnerships are enabled by the ability to share information, the ability to act in coordination or synchronization together, and as well as the ability to have common objectives. And so we look and see how we have set those partnerships, both within the interagency, within the government, as well as with our partners and allies as we look across the various theaters where adversaries are seeking to gain advantage. The new National Defense Strategy has come forward with some interesting concepts that we need to support that enable the integrated deterrence. The first one is the importance of campaigning. US Cyber Command was in 2020, General Nakasone put out the doctrine of persistent engagement, which essentially is how US Cyber Command campaigns so that small incremental gains during competition don't lead to strategic advantage by our adversaries, is we go out and contest those activities below the level of armed conflict, below the level of use of force. What we're finding is that our adversaries were gaining insight, we're gaining advantage, we're gaining footholds in the cyber domain that they could then use either in crisis or conflict, or they could use to advantage in competition. We saw it in the last decade as we lost incredible amounts of intellectual property to our adversaries through the cyber domain. Campaigning in competition is a way to help stem some of that tide. The other two concepts that we have within there is the integrated deterrence, and finally, building enduring advantage. Building enduring advantage. This is a positional advantage that you build in competition so you can enable it in crisis and conflict and leverage that activity. So the strategic partnerships that enable that are absolutely vital. One of the key things to partnerships, like I said, is the ability to share information. To share information, you have to have secure, agreed upon systems that you can share the information and have confidence that it will not be taken from you by the adversaries. If you are a foreign partner or nation, if I don't have confidence in your systems, I am hesitant to share our most classified information, even if I can decertify it. If I can move the classification bone, I don't have a means to do it, and I don't have confidence that it will remain classified. So we need to work on that, and we are. The final one is we look to expand our partnerships and allies. And again, integrated deterrence, I think that is the fundamental advantage the United States has in the strategic environment is our partnerships. Our partnerships in the Pacific are more robust, more varied than anything the PRC has. Our partnerships in Europe are more robust, more varied, more solid than anything Russia has. Our partnerships in the Middle East are more robust, more varied, more strong than anything Iran has. That is the advantage that we have as we're looking forward to take on with the adversaries that we see. The core relationships that we build is on the foundation of our 5I partners. Again, enabled by an information sharing framework and common objectives. The next priority we're looking at is recruiting, retention, and training. Now this is part of readiness, but it's such a vital aspect to what we're going to do across the command that we broke it out as a separate priority. This is where we have the competition for talent. I was just talking with General Lawrence right before this and talking about some hiring of some specific peoples and finding key talent. Talent is the scarce resource that we all in this room are, and none of you are allowed to talk to any people in my team as we're going forward on this. But that is what we're looking at, is how do we retain the talent that Tim come in and get the expertise, that come in and get that vital activity and experience in the domain. It takes time. It takes 10 years to build a 10-year operator. And as we build up that talent, how do we keep them in the domain? How do we partner with the services to do that, to ensure that they're retained in whatever capability or whatever status that is? And so we're focused on that extremely with a laser focus, with meetings with the commander, I would say, every couple of weeks just on that topic alone. The other one is we have to think through, Congress is always willing to help and grants authorities, but sometimes our processes don't let us enable those authorities to the maximum extent that we've been authorized. And so we continue to work within the department to expand that. Also, we're looking at how we can leverage relationships with academia. Our executive director at US Cyber Command is taking the lead for academic outreach to figure out how we integrate and find ways to recruit from some non-traditional areas to increase the amount of individuals that are able to serve their nation in whatever status they can. And the last priority that we're looking at this year is the Joint Cyber Warfighting Architecture and Enhanced Budgetary Control. So anyone outside of DoD has now turned off their TV. But this is absolutely vital. I talked about 3 components that make ability to have a combat force. This is how we get the capability. The Joint Cyber Warfighting Architecture, which is an architecture that integrates the critical capabilities for us to create effects as well as defend the nation. What we have is a federated approach to that with federated resourcing throughout the services, all aligned toward the objective of ensuring US Cyber Command's mission. But right now it competes for resources within service budgets with no direct oversight by US Cyber Command. That is about to change. In the FY24 budgeting, US Cyber Command will have advanced budgetary control, which means that now we have more control over our destiny as far as how the resources are spent within the department to enable our mission. Primarily focused on our headquarters, our integrated planning elements at the other components, as well as the Cyber Mission Force and the Joint Cyber Warfighting Architecture. So working through that this year was just having a conversation also with another individual prior. That is one of our J8 is expanding rapidly to enable that activity. If you imagine, for those that have done programming, budgeting within the department, we're starting from a participant in various service processes to having our own process and standing up all of the infrastructure and processes that go with that. But it's absolutely vital if we're going to continue to mature US Cyber Command to where we are. And for those to baseline, we were 10 years within, 2010 within the US Stratcom, 2018 as a standalone geographic. So it's only been 4 years of a combatant command, and it's pretty amazing from someone that joined the command just 2 years ago of how far we've come. So I've talked to a little bit about our operational approach. And preparing for this speech and looking at the website that FC had put out, I think they capture it quite well about where the operating environment is. And it's a complex strategic environment where speed and agility are critically important. I don't think anyone disagrees. The integration of offense and defense is critically important. Understanding how we build and operate the domain is critically important. In no other domain do you influence it as directly as we can in cyber. Land domain, you can shape the terrain. You can provide anti-access and kind of funnel things in the terrain, but not to the level in cyber. In the air, weather sometimes manages the terrain. Integrated air defense systems will sometimes manage the terrain, but not to the extent of cyber. And so in this case, it's absolute vital is why DODIN operations, defensive cyber operations, and offensive cyber operations are generally run by the same cadre of individuals or with some overlap. If you cannot defend what you don't understand, you cannot penetrate what you don't know how it runs. There is a shared sense of awareness. Now, we need expertise in those areas. Where you spend your training time needs to be focused on those areas, but you need to have broad understanding about the entire domain. If we parse it out, I think we would lose. So in conflict, we have to understand the role of the cyber operations as we're in fighting. And we had an exemplar here in Russia-Ukraine. Happy to take some questions as we go forward. Again, my answers might be parsed somewhat, as it's an ongoing operation, and most details are highly classified, but happy to take questions as we're going through there. But I think some observations that I can share before we do that. The first one, it's not unfolded as we predicted. If we had asked us 6 months ago of how it unfolded, I don't think we would have come up with this. I think most in this room especially would have seen a more visible role or an effectiveness of cyber. Lots of reasons of why that might have happened, which I won't expand upon here, but just realize it's probably a more complex answer than just single one answer. It's probably a conflation of intent, increased resilience, lack of capability, lack of will, and then also failure of execution. Like most operations when you look at them, if they didn't go the way you expected. The one thing I think we need to look about and think about, though, is if you think when a new technology is first used in an active conflict like this, is the first time it's used isn't generally how it ends up evolving in use over time. So I think as professionals in the regime, as we're looking at cyber and we're being asked to think about how we develop capabilities, field capabilities, and develop the doctrine and organizational structure to execute those capabilities with our team, of our personnel, that we think about how it will evolve and the lessons we will learn from this conflict. Our adversaries will learn, and that we will learn as we're going forward on this. So competition, crisis, and armed conflict are distinct geopolitical conditions. What we're learning here is how we operate in one and translates into the other changes. The most significant change, the terrain doesn't necessarily change significantly, though somewhat, is the risk tolerance changes. And we need to think through of how we are arranged to do that as we move forward. Processes that are heavily focused on some of the authorities that are with our good partners in DoD-CIO don't necessarily work as well when we're in an armed conflict. That doesn't mean they're not valid. It just means there needs to be an evolution or an understanding of how we change our risk acceptance. As we're going through in the capabilities, the risk of what I'm going to do in competition by design below the level of armed conflict and use of force may not be perceived that way when we're in a hostile environment supporting a partner and ally. One thing I do understand is that cyber, I think, will be a common thread as we go forward, is that the role of cyber in assuring the mission will not go away, and I think it will increase. The surface area to fight and win with concepts like JADC2 across the department or to produce combat power is heavily reliant on the cyber domain. That is not going to change. If we tried to walk back from that reliance, integration, sharing of information, then we will be putting ourselves at a disadvantage against near peer or peer adversaries that are leveraging the domain to create effects at speed with the agility mentioned as we talked about here in the conference this week. So in closing, what I'd like to just kind of sense with, is leave with what I talked about again of how we approach persistent engagement to negate incremental gains in competition by our adversaries so they don't end up having strategic effect or creating a fait accompli that the United States is forced to just live with. We're preparing for crisis and conflict while campaigning in competition. One feeds on the other. So with that, I appreciate your time today, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
General, it seems that we overestimated Russia's combat effectiveness and training readiness level going into the current conflict in Ukraine. You mentioned our significant advantage through partnerships. First, how would you rate our technical advantage or disadvantage versus the current capabilities of Russia? Second, many of us in the DIB thought we would have seen a large cyber attack on U.S. infrastructure by now. What should we in the DIB be focused on first when considering the Russian threat?
Okay, appreciate the question. I think as we talked about, seeing the conflict unfold as it's unfolded and continues, and how cyber is used, there's a couple of things I would offer to think about without going into very much specifics. Like I said earlier, is the intent of, and the understanding of what the effect would create and how to manage if you were trying to manage escalation of the conflict and keep it contained to your objectives. If you went in with the mindset of the operation from the Russian perspective, you might have decided to maybe self-limit in some ways. I haven't seen any intelligence that tells me that this would be true, but that's one of the things that we're exploring and how we would look at that. The other one is the cyber domain, the critical infrastructure resources, folks have increased the resilience across. And so maybe the understanding of an increased threat of changing the conditions of the environment might have had some level of effect. Again, I haven't seen that, but those are the things that we're exploring. It's like, can we prove these hypotheses as we're going forward? The other aspect is what the impacts might have been of us and our partners and allies of reducing and causing friction into the malicious cyber actors over time as we've been campaigning for many years now against these actors that might have taken those effects. So those are all, I think, things that we would take a look at it going forward, but I think far too easy to tell. And I think our kids will be writing PhD dissertations on this well into the future. With respect to SICR in the U.S., I think those aspects may also play in there as well. We are not in direct conflict. We are not in a direct conflict with Russia at this time, and I think that's one of the aspects to kind of understand what that means if there was targeting. But the other aspect is how much does our resilience increase? And really, I think the critical thing here is the level of information sharing with our partners and allies, the level of information sharing with the industrial base enabled by FBI and CISA partnering with us in NSA, I think has been a key aspect of increasing our posture and maybe being some level of a deterrent as we seek at Cyber Command to make the operating environment risky to our adversaries of discovery, costly. You have to arrange resources and time and human capital to make an effect, and in the end, futile, that they won't achieve their objectives. We're not there yet, but I think the combination of all those type of activities, I think I would examine if I was in your shoes.
General, what is currently the biggest challenge to recruiting and retaining cyber warriors, and how has the recent implementation of constructive service credit for cyber officers impacted the force so far?
I'll take the second part first. Constructed service credit, I think across the services, my job right prior to this, I was the general officer that oversaw the career fields, civilian, officer, enlisted. I think we have nibbled at the edges of what we can do with that capability. We have leveraged it, but we haven't scaled it, right? So we have leveraged the authority, but not to an effect that is going to have significant impact on the overall readiness of the force. It's having individual impact, which is important and matters, but I think we can do more as we look forward to leverage that capability. And that is one of the conversations that I'm having within our team and within the department, primarily with the service principal cyber advisors, the DoD's cyber advisor, and PNR and the Joint Staff. With respect to the first question, as far as the ability, the retention, it's we are accelerating the JICWA domain. One of the components of JICWA and our architecture to fight is the persistent cyber training environment. I think that's one of the key things. If you get trained on a capability and you're on mission and you're operating, that's good. But if there's no place for you to train and keep your skills going forward and build that and keep building that capacity, whether it's defensive or offensive, then you'd rather be doing something else. You've been trained to highly skilled to do something, and if you're not necessarily directly on mission or improving your capabilities or skills, you want to serve your nation, but you also want to feel you're adding value to your mission. When you're on mission, I get no complaints. You know, there's always discussions about, well, there's service requirements that I have to do and things like that, but I don't think that's necessarily the biggest thing. We talk about the money, not going to outcompete on money, but we can think through of how we can reduce those barriers to service in whatever capacity you can serve in. We can be better at moving between statuses, total force, go into the Guard, time and active, go into the reserve, go civilian, how we be more portable in that activity. I still think there's value to be gained there for the department. I think that's one of the areas that we should explore.
Will the Joint Warfighting Architecture budget follow a JROC type process?
So we have a cyber process that is mirrored off of JROC, CSIDS, that is mirrored off the JROC process internal to the command. So yes, we're going to have a structure of requirements. As the J3, I am the champion for most of the requirements within the JICWA, and certifying those requirements, and then the others folks within the command will acquire them. But that is, again, as we scale the command into this role, the infrastructure that the services currently have and the Joint Staff has to the boards and the other processes that are built, we're mirroring those processes. It's just the human aspect of the folks that do that as their primary job, not their third job, is where we're looking to grow that talent.
Once a cyber weapon is deployed, it's out there. What considerations does Cybercom take into account to mitigate the risk of its own weapons later being employed against the networks it's responsible to defend?
Great question. So we don't deploy, I mean, that's an interesting deployed and out there, that concept. That's not necessarily, it's interactive operations that we're doing on net for like the operations that I'm most familiar with. But when we do in those operations where we're creating effects, we are coordinating across the department and the interagency heavily. So any of the actors that have equity, so a large say if we're doing a create an effect, we have blowback assessments on the DODN. It's part of our process. They're briefed to me before I approve a package on approving an operation on the way to the general. And we also have integrations with DHS so that the aspects of what kind of sicker response could potentially come or blowback is also involved in that process. So there isn't an operation that we approve that is going to create a cyber effect that the interagency or JFHQC DODN isn't aware of, and so can take a look at their networks to see what that would mean. With respect to exploiting specific vulnerabilities, there's a process within the department or within the branch that looks at disclosure of vulnerabilities and whether it's important to disclose those vulnerabilities or if there's something that it's able to be retained for effects on the part of the command or others.
General, you talked about how important readiness is. Could you talk more about how you measure and track readiness? Please touch on JCC2 readiness and the tools you're using and how they are performing.
Okay. Individual readiness we track through DERS, and then we also have our JCC2 tool that then imports it by the person. What we're finding within the department, DERS is built for conventional forces, and it's very specific MOS, AFSC driven. It's very easy to tell. What we're finding in Cyber Command is there are higher level duty specialties, but there's work roles, and they don't necessarily, it's not as easy to say, well, I've assigned 14 17s to this unit. They may not cover all the work roles within that unit, and then therefore their readiness might not be where it's at. So JCC2 fills in that gap for us. But I just mentioned two systems, and for those that have operated, you never want to put, if you put the same data in two systems manually, it's wrong twice. So we're looking to see how we fix that and make sure those systems are, and that's one of the things we're like, we can put it in one. The system of record for the department is DERS, and we're looking at how we make sure we put it either in JCC2 and it ports over, or we do it in DERS and it ports in, and then we put in the additional. My preference is JCC2 over, but we'll have to see what is actually the more technically feasible in the near term and then how we evolve that capability. With respect to the readiness of specific capabilities, we look at that by mission set. There's not as a detailed process, but we look at our Joint Force headquarters as they're given missions. In support of the Joint Force is a lot of capability development of some of the targets that we would look to be asked to create effects on in competition, or sorry, in crisis and conflict. And then we look and see what that readiness level, but it's not at a similar process. It's more of an operational assessment, and then it's kind of an urgent operational need, joint, emergent need type of process where we would then go and advocate for resources to produce the capability.
Do you think we have enough automation in defense of the DODN? Can we respond to threats in a timely manner?
I think that's an area we'll grow into as we understand how we can leverage machine learning, artificial intelligence, as the higher level, and then automation, as three distinct type of activities. I think that's an area we can grow into right now. As far as a value assessment of we have enough, I think we can always be more. Speed is key in the domain. I learn about potential compromises. It would be great, by the time I learn about it, it would be great if it's already at least blunted without a human involvement before we could take action.
Can you speak to Cybercom's plans to work more closely with CISA moving forward?
So we have the exchange of LNOs happening. We have CISA folks within the headquarters that they do representation to the National Security Agency as well as USCYBERCOM. We also have an LNO over at DHS, but our DHS LNO sits with CISA. 1650 within the NDAA a couple years back gave us the ability to put people over there with CISA, and we've done that. We have 10 individuals over there currently from the Cyber National Mission Force. And then we also look in a defense support to civil authorities type of role we're often we put forces on call to potentially support CISA if there's any type of event that they need immediate help from the Department of Defense in times of crisis. So as you've seen, various times of crisis that have gone through, then we've done that a few times. I think we continue to evolve that relationship to really understand of how CISA would need us most in any type of response to make sure that we're postured there. We're coming to the conclusion, having teams, incident response teams or cyber protection teams ready to go support is good. I think we could evolve that, and that's one of the tasks we're taking in the near term here to think how we evolve that relationship going forward.
Sir, can you highlight some of the priority capabilities where you could use industry's help to enhance Cyber Command's defensive mission?
I'll go, I don't want to speak to General Skinner's mission directly on this, but I think as he probably discussed, as we are on our journey towards zero trust, I think, talking to this audience, everyone realizes zero trust isn't something I buy on the shelf and employ, but it's a series of capabilities and an operating paradigm of how we're going to control and architect our networks, and we're not going to do it overnight. But I think as we continue that journey through zero trust principles, understanding how we do identity, how we do that type of encryption at scale, how we ensure that we're having all those capabilities and data tagging, which is an interesting challenge in there, so that we understand the environment and go to that level of zero trust or micro-segmentation as we on that journey. I think that is going to be the place that we look forward in across the department, and we're also putting a heavy emphasis on understanding our SIPRNet environment. To my earlier point of how we talk, sharing information is absolutely vital in competition to enable success in crisis and competition. We do good sharing in conflict. We've proven it many over the last decades. We do okay sharing in crisis. It gets there, but it might not be the point. And in competition, we let other comes up because the risk profile across that isn't the same. We need to increase the resilience and the ability to share in competition, so we're not accepting risk necessarily at a greater level, but that we have more confidence that the information is secure with our partners and allies, and I think that's something that we need to look at.
We've heard many of our senior leaders talking about operationalizing the RMF. What is Cybercom's role in making this happen?
We partner closely with DoD CIO and Mr. Sherman's team, weekly senior level syncs to make sure that we're understanding where the various policies are going. The risk management framework conversation, as the integration to JFHQ DODN, and we have to secure, operate, and defend the DODN through our headquarters and direct that activity, and how General Skinner has the various AOs, areas of operation across the DODN, linking those together, that's where our play is. Also within some of the governance bodies, the deputy director one of my deputy directors for current ops sits on that, chairs that activity, working closely with DISA and DODN and all of across to understand what is in the domain and how that's being leveraged within the RMF. So that's our primary role, is understanding the assessment of risk. As far as the process, that's DoD CIOs to help run, but we are in the risk assessment business and understanding what it's bringing into the environment and having those technical conversations with NSA and others to inform the higher level policy ones.
Are there programs being developed within academia to get talent needed for cyber?
As I mentioned just briefly, our executive director is working up a strategy from a USCYBERCOM perspective that mirrors somewhat the National Security Agency's strategy and engagement with industry. One of the, from a US Cyber Command perspective, one of the challenges is always getting individuals in a timely manner. If you're competing for talent, a job offer is great. A job offer that will come to fruition in 12 months isn't fantastic. And so whereas we're working through that is of how do we do this partnership with industry to highlight individuals that are interested, and then how do we leverage them in some sort of capacity while they're in a student status that then enables follow-on easier transition post-graduation into Cyber Command and our staff in particular, but this is also something that we can look across the Cyber Mission Force as we look to leverage that. Now, it's primarily a civilian aspect, and one of the things that we're looking there as well within the military aspect, I think some of the tools that we were given from Congress, we can, like we talked about earlier, of the constructive type of credit and then rapid accelerations of various ranks. I think we could do more there But that's, again, something we need to work with the services.
Sir, the question is, what's your view of how JADC2 is being received by the services?
Okay. I don't want to speak for the services. What I would say is I think I think there is agreement that the level of information sharing and integrations of the sensing activities, intelligence activities, and the kinetic activities, I think there's broad understanding, and then wrapped it within respective information operations, broad agreement across the department that is how we need to fight if we're going to be successful. The mechanisms of how we do that, how the control, the organizational design, I think that's open discussions, and I think why the construct is how it's been going through. And so we hosted one of the JADC2 synchronization exercises up at Cybercom the other day, just to really understand, as I mentioned in my remarks, JADC2 is going to, if we don't understand the resilience and the security of the environment that it's going to run on, which is cyber domain and our networks, then JADC2 will be it will be combat ineffective, but because we won't put the level of information into the network that will enable JADC2 to the level of effectiveness that we're going to need in combat operation, or will accept significant risk.
General, that was our last question. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome General Lawrence back to the stage.
I didn't know I needed to pip up Purple Rain song. I would have come back with one. Yeah.
Well, thank you, General Kennedy. Great keynote to wrap up this conference, the real world environment, and we appreciate your sharing with us your priorities as you go forward in these difficult times. So in lieu of a speaker gift, AFCEA is going to donate to the Fisher House on behalf of you. So thank you so much.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, team. That concludes the opening keynote session. And you can see the upcoming schedule will be up here on the wing boards here in a minute of what's left for this week. We're going to close with briefings from the DISA program and portfolio managers this afternoon. There is one more set of theater sessions that will go on during this break, so please join them. And again, I can't thank you enough for joining us for this conference, especially this morning as we have our closeout keynote. Enjoy your break, and we'll see you back in here at 11:30. Thank you so much.